Good afternoon, students. Our afternoon activity today is going to be a lot of fun because we get to play tricks on the visual system. The reason that neuroscientists are interested in tricking the visual system is because it allows us to investigate how vision works, the underlying mechanisms. So I hope after this morning's lecture you're convinced that there's more to vision than the eye just working like a camera. You learn that we have separate cells that process color and form. It turns out that the retina also has a separate pathway for processing movement or motion. And I'll talk more about this in my lecture tomorrow morning. You also learned that there are many steps in processing vision, right? So the illusions that I'm going to show you today arise not only in the retina, but from many steps of processing through the brain up to the visual cortex. Now I want to make two distinctions before we start. First is the difference between illusion and hallucination.
Illusion and hallucination
An illusion is when the brain misinterprets information that is out there in the world.
Illusion
But hallucination is completely in your mind, in absence of stimuli. Okay? So I would like you to write down three questions that you will ask yourself when I show you the first slide.
This slide
So the next slide, you'll see a ring of dots. And the dots will appear and disappear. And you will see an illusion that is caused by the visual system in misinterpreting the image on the slide. Okay, so first question I want you to write down is, what did you see first? So write this down.
케기 당보 가리 통고 도스 라주라
And they should leave space on their paper to write the answer.
ता थंदा पर दिन जो तुंजु रा छुनांगी पर दिन जो दी जेला खाली खाली त्यों गोसा इने ता पर थंगो जुरा दी गी ठियो सुम यस पर दिता सन लेंगे हुरा थंदा थंगो ठियो दिमो ला ठिरो चेस ठियो थंगो दिखाला ना केगी थंगो ता दु खरि थंगो दोस ले जोरा दिरिश थंदा पर त्यों मर पर ता सन एन लेन दि ठेर थंगो ठियो दि ठिशारो चेस अन ठियो ठेसा नि लेन ठेस सजा तिस शारो छिरा तोंबा
Question 2.
अन ठियो निवा दिस
Describe any changes as you watch the image.
तदि पर दिखेना जो ता दियो रस ता दियो कब सो अनि पर दिले जुवा जुगु द्वेस दि दिशे गेरो छिसलस ता शिमबे कबले जुवा थेब जो जरा दि अनि दिशे गेरो छिसलस ठियो निवा
Question number 3. After you look at the slide, look at a sheet of paper and then write down what you see. Describe what you see.
ता तिस रिंगल ता दिनाल खर्च चोंगा दि निशु ठिसरा दि सम रिंगला अनि तेला त्यो बास त्यो लालस थेने शुभु काव शिगला त्यो अन था की खांग शिक थोंगे दुखमलस थंदा पास जुरा दिलता खर्च खशे जिता रा चोंगा निशु रोस्टे शा दिनाल ता छ जेला अनि शुभु काव जिलता असलस दिल अनि खरा खरि थोंगो दोसलस
Okay, so what do you see first? What do you see first?
ता छियो थंगो दे खरांगी थंगो खरि थोंगो दोसा
Short answer.
लेन थुंदु जिंदलस
Short answer.
सेबो दोगो जी this chick in the Tamanyam the Laseo Mau Tomatus. Chick in the
정거지 동도아. 정거지 동도 뒷다운 데서 막 연주 찌찌는 정 그래서 정자는 도.
Jangu do Lambedina. Single and Jangule. Momendi.
동도 정자는 도.
Carito Tomodo.
공간 노가이 많이 되게 찍었어요.
I'm going to start the illusion now.
Kado Major Roast Tomodos. She said, Roast Tomod. So he said, like, he can see purple dot and he can also see something round which has no color, like a transparent dot.
Okay, write down what he sees.
Kerakarton on the Tirochisa. The so Tama Jik Toera on the Cariton on the Martirochis lane, Nin such a shire on what they'll Tirochis.
And, ask them just to be very brief, not write a lot.
Kiranzo lane Tirolas, lane Rimbu Martirochis, Tundu shoot his lady. Cariton so Lanata, Dina shoe Toyata Yomara, Tundu Ginatishan Diras on the Tirochis.
And now I want them, do you have your laser pointer? Now I want them to fixate at this dot.
The Kiranzo Miktasa Kolta Wulan, the Kurukasta Gada, Dilda Wures.
Okay. So describe any changes as they watched.
The Dita Shimberga do Jua to Jura, Dick Jua Harido, the any Kirazo Tishikaroshis. Tuanyodi.
And now we'll do it again, but this time I want them to look over here and to fixate their eyes here while the illusion is on. So they should not move their eyes here, they should focus over here.
So when the image is like, when the video is playing, they should fix their gaze here?
They should fix their gaze over here.
Okay. The tisa imba niwadi, sasa. The tanda sumba di kharila na, the di tanda kurangi longi di pargi roas ra, di drodi roas. Di drodi kiran zutta sa ta dela mares. Mig di call ta gugur lana, sumba di kao di ganta gugures.
So, how many people saw a very strong effect the second time when they were looking to the right of the screen?
Tanda di sujo del thema nyuata roas, di tadugal di shugin ro di shukchilo khagas kiranzu thong sonsa. Shugin di.
Okay, so maybe we can ask a few people to describe what they saw.
Okay, so in the second part, they see these dots are circling at a faster rate.
And what color are they?
Green.
Green, right. So recall that you have 3 types of cones that are sensitive to red, green, and blue.
Ani kiranzo tingi doas manzu tanda yele mubu na keje shidu gala yola tanda di chinge khado la chasha waina di soro kembu yo thabung sum yoas di khado jangu che ani mao che ngombu imbas tisum.
When the red dots go on and off, it fatigues the red cones.
Ta tanda yura di kesi mangbu shu ta de waina ani manzu mig nang logi tanda nyungi thabung mau jura di an thangsho na shi dele chabi res gyurung buta de na maurang la.
But the green cones then become more dominant. The green signaling from the cones becomes more dominant.
Che zan ta lega che chi dir ta di mau di thang che do gala jangu di lega shu che chinge roji chabi res di wang gyu nge roji chadi res.
So your retina gets tired in a way. The retinal cells get tired of responding to the red after watching the image for a while.
So
you would get the same illusion if we had green dots on the screen going on and off. The illusion would be the appearance of moving red dots.
Ta digi tsabla ngigi tanda tsek denzo mao digi tsabla jangu shawainas ya mikta de dugala mig di jangu thong de do mik thang chi res ani chezang gogo denzo khari thongur lawana magu thong res.
And this also demonstrates another feature of the visual system, which is that we process through color opponency, red versus green. So that system is at play, and that's at the level of the retina.
Mao yana jangu la jura di drodan di tana ngazu khari gi rimbagal shigo lawana thagi rimbagal shigo resti.
When you look to the side of the screen, when you fixate over here, you're stimulating your peripheral retina.
Ta tanda kaw dile time bas di kap sungaran su khari la kujin chigir lawaina ngazu gi thanne thagi juya thalani chojuya thagi di an ngazu kujin chigir res.
Remember the graph that Professor Yovoni showed of the density of cones and rods in the central versus the peripheral retina?
Ankiranzo ge maiki shuge tuen so astina la ganzo ge da yugip thagungi tukse jora mangyo di ganzo kila khande me thana shi thagi thala khande me di she so asdi korla mangyo di korla.
So what type of photoreceptor is more prevalent, more numerous in the peripheral retina?
Ta tanda thalewe thagi thajuya ne dela ani ngaran sugi welin thagung khangi manga res. Da nika yungib okay cone cells yungib soiba yungib okay rod cells.
The rod cells there are more rod cells in the peripheral retina. So when we look over here, we're stimulating this illusion. This illusion is stimulating the rods in our peripheral retina.
다 단다 딜 따위 값수 만족이 탈레 자기 탈레에 단다 유입 잡은 줄was 딜로 그냥 되게 레스.
Now remember, rods don't care about color, but they love moving stimuli.
당한조 디 유입 잡은데 계란조 챙기도스 디나라 카레 쿠란조 카도 디가스 디저 차기요 말was 이네 디 요굴 디 요구기 슈긴 주요나 딜라 야닌 치기요스.
So they interpret this stimulus as moving. The rods interpret these flashes of light as movement. And that's why we get that after effect of a moving dots.
당아서 유입 잡은게 디따에 가서 가르쳐 올라나 카도드다 시라스 코이 디치기요 말스 이네 가리스 코이 징기어 라와이나 요구 체주라 지 구조 땅데디 하고 그레스 제상아서 젤라타 와이나 지 구조 땅데죠 로시 통도 왔어.
So this illusion is caused by tricking the cones in one case and the rods in another.
딜라도 디트낭나 따탄나서 고고타야 라우라 뒤저직라 가릴 고고땅데 라와이나 용입 잡은로 고고땅데 그레스 안 뒤저 셴질라 가리땅데 라와이나 니 용입 잡은데 고고땅으로 차드레스.
So in other words, sometimes our visual system is tricked into seeing colors that aren't there and movement that's not there.
딜라도도 고고 탭서여절라 가리통고 라와이나 가족이 따두가라 카도 메와이네 카도 통야다 당나 유고 메네 유고 치되어 통고 레스.
Okay, next illusion.
다 추낭 니바 디인스티.
So here, all they need to do is focus on the center of this while I run the movie, but they need to continue to watch it all the way through and not take their eyes off the center. And then, the second time around, I want them to cover one eye, right eye, and then test with the other eye, the left eye.
And fixing their gaze at the same cross.
While they're looking. So we're going to do it 3 times. 2 eyes, then right eye, and then they test the left eye, and then they'll cover the left eye and test the other eye.
디 키라조 딱지로 라오라 제고디 탱마숨 요레스 그리바로 당모델 가르치고 라와나 미기가 있다고 요레스 아니 따서 거는 된다는 저 그룹까지 가다 양키라 디가 따니 아니 따데레스 아니 니바델 가르치고 라와나 미기야바 디카네 요메디 지부따고 요레스 아니 숨바델 가르치고 라나 요마디카니 예바디 지고 있다고 해 디르치고 요레스.
At the end of this movie, an image of Buddha of Kamakura appears, and I want them to look at the image of the Buddha and tell me what they see.
안젤라 디 카레 템베기 디 쿠치 통레스 라케란스 지레스 안디 케란스 통두갈 칸데스 토낭 한데 요메 디디 아니 케란스 디시 야로치스.
Okay, ready?
30 years.
Ready? Okay, now cover left eye.
tamig yoma dikani sirochis. Yoma pajodi.
Now look with your left eye.
Ta yebadi.
Supposed to go again. Okay, now keep that eye covered. Right eye covered.
Right eye.
We'll do it again.
Tamig yebadi karochis.
At the end of this, they should test what happens to the Buddha with the eye that is covered. Uncover. Uncover the. Now, test the eye that you covered. Okay, the next time they see the Buddha, they should cover the eye, the other eye, and look through the eye. So they cover the right eye, and then they test that eye. Okay, they can raise their hands. How many people the first time with both eyes saw the Buddha getting bigger and bigger and bigger? Yeah, it's really strong effect. Yeah. How many people, when they covered their left eye and then looked at the image with the right eye, with the left eye. So when you cover the left eye, you're looking through your right eye, and then you look at the Buddha with your left eye, which hasn't seen the pinwheel.
Yes. It also got bigger.
Yeah, so how does that work? They saw the effect in the eye that was covered. Okay, we have an idea over here. Let's see.
So we talked about optic chiasm. It's because of that.
What about the optic chiasm? So this is the visual field, outside world. And recall that when you fixate, each retina sees a part of the visual field. So for example, when you're fixating on a point, I should say, when the eyes are turned and fixating on a point, then that information is carried. Did I do this wrong? That information is carried to both sides of the brain. So when we look at a point, when we're fixating a point with our eyes, that information is carried to both sides of the brain because we have some fibers going the same way, side of the brain, and others cross to the other side of the brain. So information about the visual field is in both sides of the cortex.
다 딩나라 디 통조기 rawa yin krete ine ngaranzu gi thanda tawe kapsu chek chik rang latta de bas ne chik latta rang mini gai di ani chek chik latta du gola di gi ne su dini li roas di le sa jala dini du res di ro cha shaina mi ye ban le ro ne su di ye ban le oina chik ne su chi khwa du la oina khaptu lebe yume chode dosa dumche yuma del du res ani ne su chaji khwa du la oina dumche ye ba del du res chesa ne su di lebe gi thanda dumche ni ga la li res.
So the gentleman is correct. It is because of the optic chiasm, but it's also because retinal ganglion cell axons from each retina that see the same part of the visual field project to the same side of the brain. So when we look when we look at this illusion with the right eye, that information is projected to the left visual cortex, and then then we can analyze that. We get the same effect through the left eye.
tanda di kirangi shio tanda nyonsam di chagi yores chi kharalana manju gi tanda chagi gi sadu juwa di ani nesu di leni ani nesu di chok chi rang tangi yores yeba ni lemba na yomal tan jura di chi yores.
So neuroscientists think this is due to a phenomenon called interocular transfer, but it's still under debate.
tanda kuranzu sheju chik chiyo na tanda yama gedin che jura intraocular lana migi nanglo yama gedin che lan dinde chi shi yores ine digal thandu doling do yores.
Okay, now the third illusion, and for this illusion it's called snake wheels, and it's an illusory motion.
da sumba jura dinala khari tumbi lawana ani yogu tumbi yores.
So in this illusion you need to fixate one of the wheels. So start fixating this wheel.
tanda chukor rore da di kholo mangbuji dos dinal kholo dirang tanda chek na bugal ta gyaso dirang gal taroshis.
And over time the other wheels will start to turn.
ta di kal ta di ros tis ne kharchir lawena kholo shemba den khurbe rosh tungres.
But then if you go to look at one of the other wheels, it appears to stop turning.
ta khorgu du samsa diliya ta waina andi yogu che jam shagres.
How many people see the illusion of movement in the wheels that they're not staring at?
ta khiran zu mata sagi tanda korgor mangbuji dos chi kogo chi la ta lara ni shemba den zo ni kora ge yo do khazu gi thon sons so so ta sa de member shemba den zo yo ra kogo shemba den zo kora ge yo khazu gi thon sons sa ali mang che thon ma da.
How many people thought it was snakes? How many people thought it was snakes moving? How many people thought it looked like snakes moving?
ta khiran zu ra mi khazu gi di tanda parji do du do thon sons du ho no
No.
they didn't feel.
These are supposed to be snake tongues.
Quand la télé roten dollars, the dream become querelas.
But this illusion stimulates a part of your brain that's processing motion.
The dig and the lebegi and the neck hurting your law and the yesil dosa and the yogu the jura, the corsi rest.
And it turns out, we don't fully understand it, but it turns out that the colors that are next to each other, it's important to have exactly the right sequence. So there's an appearance of motion from the black to the blue and from the yellow to the white. So it appears to move, but it only appears to move in one direction because of the changing colors.
That and the corgio dosh to dos, the quay did and the cado did down the Taran digu res. And then I yoguchi down the Kandatumulana, Napuni Mombula dredge, Mombuni, Napuni Mombuchi, Mombuni cow dredge, Tarana Shin Seuni cow yong, Cordan the Nukurgu res.
So the motion always appears to go in the direction from darker to lighter color.
제산다 디 요구 지당 저랑 저 통도갈 칸데 통구라나 카도 나가니 아니 카라 초동이 딘디시 통구레스.
Okay, let's take a look at the next illusion now.
ता 추나 셴바딜라직 시다스.
So this is called cylinder on a checkerboard.
ता 탄다 딩아 저 투시 망부지 도디 가나 아니 탄다 디 실린더 샤교 입디 샤와지 치유레스.
Where do you think the light is coming from that's casting the shadow?
ता 탄다 데라 팀나 로지 통구 도스. 안 팀나디 아니 요 칸에 리기어 로도스 팀나 딜타디 팀나 수도스 아니 요 칸에 리기어 로도스. From the right side?
Yes, from the right side. So it looks like there's light coming onto the cylinder from here, and then that cylinder casts a shadow on the checkerboard, right?
디 로도스 타두갈 요 디디네 포와체라 아니 디 탄다 입디게 아니 팀나디 델 리기어 스토도스.
So these squares have a shadow cast on them, right?
디 탄다 투시카 항 망부지 도스 디 가나 아니 팀나 포디 요로시 도스.
So B is in shadow, but A is not. Is that right?
제산다 투시카 항마 딘졸 따오나 비 딜라 팀나 포 도스 아니 A 딜라 포 도스.
Okay. Now, these lines are exactly the same shade of gray from top to bottom.
ता 딜 틱니 통구 도스 디 틱니가 카도 카르라나 텔도레 도스 치빠치키안 레스 제네 치네 마오보도 카도 치부치키안 레스 팅이.
So, why is it possible to fool our visual system with this illusion?
제장 안주이다 통솔 말랄라 고고르땅 추주로 라오라디 디 칸데 숭구 레스.
You know now that A and B are exactly the same shade of gray, but you still are fooled, even though you know that.
ता 탄다 파르지 뚠사 틱니 디 샤두 갈라 파르 테가란 로 틱니 디 샤두 디니 카도 치고 임바 통구 도스 카도 치고 레도 레민데. So he's saying it's not the same shade A and B even if you put two lines.
If I could cover this up, you would see it's the same shade.
디카 와이나 아니 키란소 디 통구 도사 텔도 A the beach do 카도 치고 레민데스. 레민데. So he is the only one who's saying these two are different color.
Don't you trust me?
말레 이 지금 민데스. 거도. 근데
A and B is exactly the same.
because he's saying B, he feels that he sees B lighter than A. Because he said he can see B is lighter.
This is exactly the same from top to bottom.
Ota dil acha shada sa tumbo thikni do dini khado chikpo chikyan relas kangni wabado dini chikpo chikyan inda disum chikpo re do remendo disum chikpo remende
Okay. They should do this. That's what they do. They should look at it and cover the green cylinder with their hand.
ota kheran danda khado khaga dulara the cylinder jangush thungu dos ibdi dikani taro chidalas dirmatani jangu
Not their eye.
dikani
Just cover it.
la madari
Just cover it. Look with one eye and cover it.
dikani tadala susu jangu dikani tadala chigure okay, now he's saying yeah, it's the same color.
Okay. So why is our visual system, why is our visual system fooled by this? What's going on in our brain?
ता तंदा खदो चिपरे दोस इने मिगी थोंजोर माला जोरा थोंजोर माला गोगोर थेयो रास अंदी गजो तंदा हमारो जो थोंजोर माला ला खारी छुंगयो लेबन ना खारी छुंगयो रेस.
Any ideas?
Samsu
Raise your hand, somebody.
samsu na cha kya ro shida san.
Anybody have an idea? Raise your hand. Over here. Kayla, can we give him? Bless you.
Tokpa. Topa ale. So since we have been like without these two lines before when we were looking at the image, so we feel that the B is darker than A. So we have this in our mind. That's why even if you show these two lines, we feel, because of that in mind, we feel that these two are different color.
Yes, so that's a very good explanation, that we have a lifetime of experiences with objects that cast shadows. So that becomes part of our memory. We learn about the world.
Temba dewa chabi was. Manju mize gangza da nyonga damina ligi was. Di nala manju ki khari hago lana ngobo jiyo ena yobona digi timna suyo hago was. Digi nyonga da temba dilteni and di chabi res.
So because of our experience in the world, when we see an object that has light coming from one side, we predict it will cast a shadow. And so even when the shadow is not there, we interpret this as a shadow.
Ta manju ki khatu na misena nyonga damina ligi was. Nyonga na la chi khari she de la na kisi yoji pho wa na ngobo jila. Ngobo di timna sura yo pho sai phajo dela. Di timna suyo hago was. Chezanta di thon da dela chiloni yoji li yo dos thong was. Di thong do ngaran jo lamsa khari samgyo la na dela timna jiyo timna mewa ina timna yo ji kera samgyo res.
So out in the real world, why might this property of the visual system be important for us, for survival, for navigating through our environment?
Ta di nganjo khuriu na chune da ta lamga che da di kharilana di ani kharjin khechum chabu res thongzor mala di.
Please raise your hand if you have an idea.
An samchu dil samchu yo na cha kyang ro ches. Nganjo gyunde gi mise na chune da dinde che do ani di thongzor mala di kharjin khechum chabu res. Kandini ali di timna yo maru res. So there is no shadow there. Yo mares.
Ade kebo na mai ba ji Quran shom na bol ji sera tagaro ji taga jai na ne shugo kinda ro tri je ya so ji ba ji to ne.
Kandis china?
Kana ga deba da tong da de e de bi ni le shida ma kinda da ma zu ba ina ne to zu ka ji da te ane kinda ro zu ba ina to ji ba tong da. Ta de temo Quran na mai ba ji da.
Shobo Quran ra.
Shobo Quran ga ji ane ga da tri ta ba ina da to zu de ji ba to ne.
So this is projected on the screen, right? So if we take this as a print on a paper, can we see the same effect?
Sure.
No,
Why do they think that our visual system learns to interpret the world as having shadows and sources of light in it? How might we be using this to get around in the environment?
Tadanda yopo wa ina ngobojila digi timna sugu yore la jura ngazo khoriu korgi ni su roji shen ros digi en ngaran so la khari phingi yores.
네, 통zo 말아도 개체와 이미 윤세 가르치느라 안에 ngazo 시 꾸진 서터 시 고요라더니 안에 소소 송조지야라서 뭐 팔체와제 안에 통zo 말아던 저 여레스 때에 선제대 개체무 잘.
So visual system is important to us because whatever physical stimulus we get from the environment, so we can differentiate and save ourselves from stimulus which is harmful to us.
Sure. So it helps us know what is a real object that's there and know the difference between the real object and the shadow it casts. Right? So it helps us avoid running into things and becoming confused by the light in the environment around us and what we're seeing. It helps us interpret a very complex environment.
Dillo thanda di chashana yopo da timna soya dike shiga dilla dugalta ngobo di yo che ani ngobo ji yo timna phogu yo di ngaran chu ni chu di shingyo ros di shimbi ki ngazo ita ngobo dilla madabe dende sama su sungyop chi ros di ne chu di ragu ros chi.
So in this situation, we perceive a shadow being cast across this checkerboard. And yet we perceive this as being one checkerboard, a unified checkerboard, and we know it's a shadow, not a difference really in the brightness or darkness of these squares.
Ta thanda nganzo ta du gola di wa de thusu ji dos di ga la nganzo ta du gola di khari samlo na khari ligor law na khari samgyor law na timna ji ba ha hu ros ngone gorta wa na thanda di thushi 단다 카강마 망부시도스 에다 비니 카도 직바인 바 하고 요로스.
So the next slide is a more convincing demonstration that when we have different amounts of light being reflected off of an object, we still see the object as the same, even though it's reflecting different amounts of light.
단다 디 젤라 슬라이드 직동으로스 디날 카리 통으로 라와나 카도질로 요 토고로스 요디 도교디니 요 로가 차디오레스 지보 마레스 디 임바이네 단데 간주 모부디 카리 통고라나 지보직견 통고요레스 카도.
So notice, for example, that in this image, light is coming from over here. The sun is over here. And it's casting a shadow on the monk's robes over here and over here and up here. In fact, it's black. It looks black here.
다 단다 디파르나 타와이나스 요 파닐리 요로스 요 레서 요젤라니 디 요 포사 갭든 주 차디오로스 다 단다 디 킬라 싱기 디 와션다 디 촐 타와이나 팀나 차기오로스 대하나시 디 갭디 팀나 로스 디 사만 나가 통고도스 주타디.
So, did these monks do a bad job washing their robes?
그런서 돌로
So it's very dirty on this side and cleaner on this side?
딜르디다 딜타디 나고로 통고도스 니 콘서 돌로 디 셴답 디 야부 마투요레 카레스. 나 팀나레. No, it's because of the shadow.
Because of the shadow. So we perceive this as the same color, even though part of it's in shadow and part of it's in the bright sunlight. And we do this all the time without even thinking about it.
다 단다 따도 걸어 통도 가르 통고라나 디 나가 통고도스 디 카도 마라 통고도스 이네 나라서 두시 가리 키워르는 거니 가리 하고 되라나 디 카도 치긴 바 하고 요로스 통도 가르 통고라나 카도 케바도스 이네 따도 나라서 이삼로나 가리 리고라나 두시 가리 키고라나 카도 치긴 바 리요로스.
So this effect is called color constancy.
다 딜라 아니 카도 다 데웨 단다 컨센시 라 디 차요레스.
And again, it's a property of the visual system that is learned.
디 엔탄다 간주기 통소르 말라다 장니 치에 줘라 디 에니 데와 차요레스.
Okay, here's my favorite one.
다 딩아라 가쇼 디스 치.
This is called the rotating mask illusion.
다 탄다 디 가리차고 라나 바든 조 코라 갸딩에 덴데 주요레스.
Now, in this illusion, when you think of a mask, you know a mask follows the shape of your face, and one side is convex and one side is concave.
땅 아주 바 용바이나 바 디카리올라나 동베 입로 수그로스 디 스웨두갈라 디기 초치 카리올라와이나 부르수게로스 초치 공수게로스 공공 제치 부르부 덴데 차데로스 바라데.
And in our experience, faces are always convex, they're not concave.
땅 알아서 미로 차샤와이나 동 칸데지 따와이나 카리올라와이나 부르부 된데 요로스 공공 마로스 밀따와이나.
So in this illusion, our brain is first interpreting what we see as a face and then as a mask, the inside of a mask.
다 당고 딜 따도 간주 레베기 디 나로 두셰 카리 징기올라와이나 동바지 동지임바 징기오레스 안 젤라 카리리르라와이나 아니 탄다 바임바 바디 칸데메 나무 치주다 딜리오레스 니수디.
Did everyone see the illusion? So it flips suddenly between the inside of the mask and then a face jumping out at you, right?
Dilo de bang nang lo de thungi ya dong su li yo de thungu dos lam san jiu ge dos.
And this happens unconsciously. We don't have any control over what we're seeing here, and it's due to our previous experiences looking at faces.
Ta thanda de she chur myo ga la su su tang ji myo ga la di chu yo res. Di khain na ni me nyong wa ju ra nga me nyong wa te ni yo res di chu di.
And it turns out, of course, that looking at faces and reading and interpreting expressions on faces of people is something that's very important for in our lives.
Nga zo dong te che di chi bu mai ba che ani thanda dong la ta wa zam gi mai ba che dong gi nam ju dra mi re ra di khari me ani su su shen di ke chu bu shu cha go ras mi zina.
And in fact, the visual system devotes a lot of space in the visual cortex for face processing.
Di la de dong gi thanda ni su di esel che ju ras di gi che do ani thong zor mala gi di le ha shu chu bu chu yo res di dan de.
And as we'll talk about tomorrow in my lecture, there are regions of the cortex, in particular a region called inferotemporal cortex, that contains many neurons tuned specifically to faces.
Dila du tang azu murgon le shu ji ras di da dewe ani thanda azu mi thanda dong da dewe yo thanda ni su de zo ani thanda murgon le shu cho de la di kor ani stangi she was.
But in earlier stages of visual processing, we see neurons that are mostly tuned to edges or lines.
Ta thanda wangza de zo mangcha thanda ngaran su gi cha sha na thanda kuran su gi dong da dewe khari da dewe cha dior la na mangcha khari da di dior la na thik den de la di dior res.
So here's an illusion called the Mueller-Lyer illusion that involves two objects, two lines, which are actually identical lengths, but because of the endings, our visual system interprets them as different.
Ta thanda di chunang ju das dinal khari yor la wa na thik ni yor res. Thik ni di ringdung ta wa na chi ko chi gyang res. Ine di ni gi ne ni ju das dila ni das yo das da di kheba yo sang ani ngzu gi thongdu ko la lo wa thong yor res. Thik ni di.
So it's hard to believe, but these two lines are the same length. This line is the same length.
Ta khiran zu yi che kha ko chari do sa di thik ni di ringdung chi pare la wa na chi ko chi kyang re la wa na.
So this illusion is thought to be caused by stimulation of neurons in a pathway in the visual system I'll talk about tomorrow that's very interested in shape and form.
Ta thanda thik da dewe an thang na shi ib da namba yo ra di da dewe ani ngzu lebe nang lo esel che ju ras thong zor da dewe di kor ani sangi she yes.
You know, most of the time when we're walking through the world, we see edges like the edge of a desk.
Ta chidang ngzu khore na na ngzu yama khomba jani mangbush to gu ras dinde yama draw kap so ani ngzu gi thala ora as na na ta dinde mangbush to gu ras na
Or the edge of a table.
an thang na shi chok je gi ta tharo cha sha na di gu ras.
And we use that information, those edges, to actually figure out in 3 dimensions the shape of the object.
Ta thanda tha ju ras tha di thong cham mai ba di chok cha sum de ni da ngobu de khandi me ne chu di ra gu ras ngzu.
So in this case, this pathway called the what pathway in the visual system is actually using this information to figure out that this could be part of a table, for example, or a corner.
Ta thanda yulam khandi gi gyuni ngara ju gi ta yewa che tu res di cha she de do di chok je gi cha she re ya na chala she ba gi cha she ji res la ni khandi yewa che gi res.
And so you can see in the next figure another example of this. These are tables, and how many people think that the table on the left is longer than the table on the right?
Ta khiran zu na ni thanda di chok se ros ni ga ani yoma chok se yoma de ring adu ye bale yoma de ring adu sam ni kha ju yes.
How many? Okay, about half. Now we're going to take the tabletop and put it on the other table.
Ta di chok se thanda gang ji do leble di ye kya ni di ga shai das.
What's going on here?
Khar chungu du lasta de. It's the same.
It's the same. This is like one of the most powerful visual illusions that have been discovered.
다 단다 사링에 망보지 중요 라스 추낭 통조다 제외 디 슈체다 케치직 디 차도레스.
It's the perspective view. We learn to interpret these edges and the perspective. And so normally, from this perspective, this table would be on a floor of a room, and it would be much larger than that table.
다 단다 나라주 간데 징교 라와나 통낭 로아다 디기 쪽세디 사가라 요아체 샬라가 요아체 디 쪽세디 파졸 두로아이나 링아 요아 딘데지 삼교 로아스.
So we interpret, even though this part of each table is the same, we interpret this as distance away from us, a longer table.
당 나라주 디 카리 링교 렌당 한데스 링교 라와이나 디단 디니 치파 임바체 아니 파 중에시도 나라주니 타 링아 요 중에 딘데지 지교 로아스.
Okay. You can also see this same trick that our visual system plays on us in these two images where it's the same shape, it's just in this case the lines around it confuse us into thinking that this is a shorter table and this is a longer table.
타디 파르니 도아스 파르니가 찍부지경 레스 체중도 다 단다 따두고라 디 탈라 태겐데 텐도아스 디 텐당 만다오 통당 만다오 디기 kengi ngazu tunang diligi res chejung ya rosh thong res.
So when we look at this, we assume that this side of the girl is farther away in this image.
ta di par na ta du gala di phumudi phajo tharinga ya rosh doas ta du.
And so our visual system distorts that image so it looks like it's she appears to be flat on the tabletop.
Dila de ani ngazu tende thong kengi ani ngazu gi thongdang dila gyodoni and di level rosh thong doas.
Now, the last image is shown here. How many cats are in the picture?
Ta di par na la shimi khajo dosa. 1. Some are saying 2.
Some are saying 2.
3. Some are saying 3.
Ah. Here's 1.
Chikre dosa dila chik. Hola. Di.
There's 2. Where's the third cat?
Sum dulara sumba di kodos.
Where's the third cat? Down here?
Hola.
Down here?
Sum du sum ni kodos. Sumba kodos.
Right here.
Kandi dela chigire. Di shimire. Shimirle dire. So you're saying that's the third cat?
All right, let me ask. Is this a cat?
Di shimire sa danda di.
No. Okay, so this is another example of how our visual system requires very little information for us to fill in. We can see we don't see the whole cat. In some cases, we only see the tail of the cat. And yet our visual system fills in the information and figures out and we do this all the time.
Ta danda dinal ta dusta wa chamgi mi gi thongjor malagi thanda khari thonggo lawaina shimi chi dige chazang thongmundas subu chazang thonggo yo maras thana shi wo di lembaina chazang thongmundas hamaji bu thongdas an di thanda ngaran sugi ta thanda thongjor malala pogor tawana shi dinde ji chadyo res ta di khaduna khawung chio dora ta ne chuma changyo de dinde chadu res.
So I hope that we've been able to convince you that our brain and our visual system is constantly interpreting what we see to help us in the world.
Dila de tamazo thongjor malada lebe khaduna ne chu din jo yese che jora di ani koryu ni ne chu len che di soso rangi din jo dige jora dinde chine ani ngaran solo phingi yo reslani di kiran su seo cha suesa.
So do you have any questions before we end the afternoon activity?
Tadi chego di jam masha khon la kiran su tiwa in the US. 다 지고디 차로 타마디 레스티
아디 통솔 말하라 사와다 정모든지 바게자는 내게 거라 나 정화다 아니 사와들이요 그동안도 니 바게자는 내게도 하나 레슨을 다 줘거라 정모에서 아니 사월에서는 다디도 아니 디 정모다 아니 사와도 로간로간이 기에 먼저 템바 로간로간이 열시도 아니 때 이제 want to tell you कि उनके बंदा था जो दी relation था जो दी बंदा इंगे ला को दी थामोदा ने छाव ये बात करने साको इसको लोगों लोगों ने किए दो
타우저 징에다 레슈 레데시네 차오 로가 줘다 장모 니수 로가 줘줘라
छाव दी छाव रेशा ने या किए दो दा थामो रेशा या किए लारो किए लोगों लोगों ये लारा वो दी युवा करने था जो रेस इन्हें टांगो रेशा लाये दी शुगो दी लेशुन था जो दोस इन्हें टांगो ने दी टांगो रेशा से पहले इन्हें खाने की रेस ठिकाने हाँ बोले लो
So you said that whether the object is cold or hot, the brain is perceiving that. Only at the level of brain or the cortex, it is something is perceived as hot or cold. But there are different pathways, right, for cold and hot as well. So how is this distinction made? Because the distinction of hot and cold happens in the brain.
That's right. So there are different receptors that are sensitive to different temperatures of cold or hot. And that information is carried through several different synapses and pathways from the spinal cord up to the primary somatosensory cortex. And in the primary somatosensory cortex, that information is brought together to the same neurons, so now they receive both kinds of information, and they can interpret then, for example, a change in temperature over time, as something gets colder and colder or warmer and warmer. So that information converges onto single neurons up in the primary somatosensory cortex.
Tanda di yores di tanda chau changmu yime di da lebe di hagu leshun le di hagu wores ine tangbo len jora ni su di lengi di la mixe chau lengi rang la yan chau gi ne lemba yores thana chi changmu lengi gi changmu ne lemba yores di gi lengi di gi. So how these receptors are able to know that whether the something is hot or cold?
So remember that I showed a slide of the different TRP receptors in the cell membrane, and each one has a slightly different molecular structure that is responsive both to temperature and also to certain chemicals, and that it's the molecular structure that determines how that receptor will respond to temperature.
Da tanda ngone kiran su gi tanda ngazu dudul ko shesos dudul zedin zo thesare mo di thidu gala trip na la mangbu yo STRP la ni mangbu shten so di tendu gala di na lo dudul ros tizedin zo di dudul din zo tanda nelim bagi di chau yume thangmu yume ta joro di dudul di ra li yores chau thangmu chi bu mai ba ani tanda nilin di yalin te dang joro di la kheba du yores dudul din zo tani chau thangmu chi bu mai ba je lage kheba yores nilin chi dang.
Similarly, in the retina, different photopigments absorb different wavelengths of light.
Thana shita tanda ngajo chau thangmu chi bu mai ba mi gi thagi na cha shawena an dina la ngajo gi yelin thamu min ro yos dige gi ani tanda yu gi lapse logo ling jigu yos ngajo.
Are there other questions?
뉴유 타본다 유유 타본이 송소 다다 가서 배나 뉴무군 잘라 가서 가르 코유다 라와 가르 통바이나 가르서는 뉴유 타본디 베죠 제레스 아니 세나고 나콘 때 아니 뭐나 ing에도라 가르서는 유유 타본디 베죠 제레스 송소 아니 드린도 안에 배나 뉴유 타본디게 가서 뉴무군 배나 천차 만다와 가지 그거 통하여라 마보 세보 아니 연락 자이 가도 제 연락 가도 제라서 만다 쉬부지 통하여라 그래서 뉴유 타본기 또 통도 근데 만다와 차선도 뉴 타본 코란 지부기 달랭레 안에 세볼랭이 지 타본지 아 홈볼랭이 타본지 간다 요르 또 로가는 요 아레스
khado lengi nyungi chabung chikrang re yana loga yo restra. So you talked about cone cells which receives different wavelengths, right? So are there different receptors for different colors, or is it the same photoreceptor which receives all colors? And this receptor distinguishes between different colors. So are there different photoreceptors?
There are different types of cone cells.
Ta thandang anzugi nyungyip thabung ro chas nyungyip thabung yorwas nyungyip thabung la rig mindo yores di nanglo.
And some people who can't, one common colored vision defect is inability to distinguish between blue and green, and that's caused by a mutation in the photopigment in the cone cells that express that pigment, but not the red pigment.
Ta thanda khashi khado yama yawache ma thwe yorwas dige indu khashi mi khashi kharo lan ngombu de jangu yawache thu yo mares dila de ni khoran su ge thanda mi gi nanglo dudul jorwas chwezi ri dila ni gurdo to eking gi chag yores.
And the genes for these different photopigments have now been cloned in humans, and there are many mutations that occur in the human population.
Chezanta di chwezi swenge gi ngajo rigze ta waina rigze dile gurdo mangbu ji to ngaran su ni jur to yo chin yo di ngaran su ta ji chin ni yores ni jur chin be king gi andi ka khado yawache ma thwe gi chag yores gurdo yo rigze la di gi king gi dudul la gyo do yores.
pena nga to chiba na ba wanki ane tung ka bu ina ya tung se bu zenya jora te pe cha ga na
Tiba hepatitis tile jaundice seo thoe di seo supu seo chae dra
가르잖아 자동 까부터서 세부 통으로 집안 나봐 휴청모 영에서 나사 휴청모 영에 동가 동 까부 영이라 동 리나 동 세부 영이라 동 세부 차그라 꼴라 때 가르잖아 다티 다 달랭에 줘라 단다 뉴 타봉로 돼. 때 안에 디 가르 다 랭동 간디리 세부 랭에 때 랭에 가는 세부 랭에 가는 뉴 타봉진도 와 딩에 랭에 까부 랭에 가는 뉴 타봉 딩에 랭에
Okay, so his question is, he said a person suffering from jaundice, when that person looks at the conch shell is white usually, right? So when that person who is suffering from jaundice look at that white conch shell, he sees yellow conch shell. So how is this color seen by that person? Is it the photoreceptor which yellow photoreceptor which is meant for yellow is receiving a yellow color, or is it the white receptor which is receiving the color but it misinterprets as a yellow color?
So normally that part of your eye is white. However, when you have jaundice, your body builds up chemicals that are yellow, and that yellow chemical gets into the sclera, into the white of the eye, and it actually turns it yellow. So when you see that, you're seeing it with cones that detect yellow. Remember, that's the combination of the red cones and the green cones.
So the retina is getting the image from sclera?
Yes.
Somebody else's retina is getting the image.
Yes. Yeah, the person looking at someone.
No. He said like when the person suffering from jaundice is looking at a white conch shell, he does not see as white. He sees that as yellow.
Okay. Well, I don't know why that is.
So maybe, is it bilirubin? Bilirubin is somehow in the...
So is there a photoreceptor which takes in yellow color, or is it the white receptor which takes...
So the cornea itself is going to take on a yellow tint. Probably the fluid inside of the globe of the eye is going to have yellow in it because it's got bilirubin from the jaundice, from the
liver.
disease.
Tatanda di peje yingire la seo chida shetung dus tadi tiba now emboina migi nanglo la shirsu do yorwas di tanda ngajo je bilirubin la di mangbu tumbi res de now ina di kingi ta seo do cha di kingi yin sigirwas ne seo je how me peje di yingires.
Okay, so remember that tomorrow we have a review session. So look over all of your notes and come with lots of questions.
An sangi kyarjong che is an chezang kyarjong che du kiranzo tamataro chesra ta san ani topa de tio khari una sangi koiro ches kyanga ji tio di seo chama sa yule de khado lendi seo chase.
So there will be a short quiz at the beginning at 3:15 when we begin, and it will be a 10-question vocabulary quiz.
Ta sangi nyingbu gyab chuzu sumda kama chonga la ngazu quiz yo la sa thangye de zo gaji tizero tio tilin yo la sa dinde ani thangye choose tangi is dinala tio.
And then we'll do a review session after that. So come, I'll see you tomorrow morning for the morning lectures, and the afternoon review session is at 3:15.
Ani shoge zinra namju ro dures an nyingbu gyab la thanda chuzu sumda kama chonga la an kyarjong che de is.
Okay? Thank you.
Tusinam.
Have a good night.